thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The conference tonight is on the holiness and virtues of Our Lady. And before we actually start talking about her, I think we need to talk about what holiness is, what virtue is. There's a lot of misunderstanding of that today. Holiness, of course, is that you're like God, because God is holy. And so the tradition of the church has always been that holiness consists primarily in having a lot of sanctifying grace in your soul. What is this sanctifying grace? Sanctifying grace is when God creates in your soul an image of himself. St. Paul talks about it. He says when we participate in divine life, which means that God, some of the saints define it as the creative participation in divine nature. Unlike Christ, who was God himself, holiness or the sanctifying grace in our soul is a participation in God. It's not God himself, but a creative participation in God's uncreated. So there's this image of the Blessed Trinity in our soul. Sometimes they say it's the Holy Spirit that's in our soul. The Holy Spirit, of course, being the love of God the Father and God the Son for each other, so that the love of God actually is in your soul. So anybody who's in the state of grace, from the time of their baptism, or if they've committed moral sin since then, and they have gone to confession and been restored to the state of sanctifying grace, technically speaking, they have sanctifying grace in them. What is holiness? Because there's, in a certain sense, that's holy. Just being in the state of grace is itself being holy. But there's obviously degrees of holiness, and when we think of the saints who are very holy, we think of somebody who has a lot of that. St. Thomas makes the observation that you can actually constantly increase the amount of sanctifying grace that you have in your soul. We're going to talk about that, what that means, because when they say to Our Lady, or when St. Heroes to Our Lady, Hail Mary, full of grace, what does that mean to say she's full of grace? So the point is that sanctifying grace, holiness is this sanctifying grace which is in our soul. We lose it through mortal sin, but if we're in the state of grace and we continue to perform meritorious actions, as we do virtuous deeds, that is, good moral actions with a supernatural intention, even for the love of God or for the sake of your neighbor, or to offer up for somebody who needs the grace or what have you, then it actually increases the amount of grace, sanctifying grace in our souls. So we keep becoming holier and holier and holier, and God's participation, this creative participation, begins to increase. Virtue, so there's sanctifying grace that's in the soul, there's actual grace that actually helps me to perform supernatural actions like offering things up, saying my prayers, loving God, etc. Those are actual graces. And then virtue is a good habit. And a good habit is, it's a quality in the faculties of our soul, like our faculty of speech, our intellect, our will, our emotions. There's two different appetites. It has our emotions, useful appetites, one from which things that we like, we hate, things of that sort, on a lower level, down the will. Those are virtues will be in those particular faculties that govern them and moderate them. Virtue, Aristotle says, in the whole moral tradition after him, he says virtue does two things to the person. One is because it's a quality in the faculty, it makes the faculty or the person good. It renders them good. Because it perfects them in some way, because there's this additional goodness that's added to their soul, this good habit, because the habit's an inclination to perform a good action. That's the other part of it is that a virtue is something that inclines us to perform a good action. Okay? So what's the connection between virtue and holiness? The definition of sanctified perfection is excellence in grace, which means your soul has a lot of sanctifying grace in it. And how do you get that sanctifying grace? By performing virtuous actions. So, the other part of the definition, so it's excellence in grace and the adornment of the soul with all of virtues. That's the virtue here and there, but all of the virtues. How many virtues are there? 64. Most people probably going to be able to squeak out, if you ask them how many virtues, you know what are the virtues, they might be able to squeak out maybe 10 if they're lucky. But there's actually 64 different virtues that perfect our soul. Maybe we can just switch to Our Lady. Pope Pius IX, in defining the Immaculate Conception, says that, in the defining statement, he says, Our Lady, by a singular privilege, and remember that word singular written in the back of that, by a singular privilege, was preserved, so she would have had original sin had the Holy Ghost, had Christ not preserved her from original sin. That preservation from original sin means that when she was conceived, at the same instance in which she was conceived in the state of grace. Now it's a singular privilege. Of all of the creatures that have been created, and those that were created in the state of grace were the angels, Our Lady, and the human nature in Christ, and Adam and Eve. Right? Everyone else was created in the state of original sin. That's all of us, right? Now there were some, according to the tradition of the church, there were some saints who were actually sanctified before they were even born, such as St. John the Baptist and St. Joseph. It is the pious tradition of the church that before they were born, they were actually sanctified in the womb. That time in which we know, where it's in Revelation, or one of the places we know with St. John the Baptist is, when Elizabeth says to Our Lady, when I heard your voice, so Our Lady's voice was the instrument by which God used to sanctify St. John the Baptist, the baby in my womb wept, right? So that was one of the interpretations of that historically has been that he was sanctified in the womb, so that when he was born, he was already in the state of grace, right? And then from there, he continued to grow in virtue. But Our Lady had this singular privilege. So she was different from everyone else in this sense. She was the only one who, after original sin, was created in the state of grace. There was a human purity, a human being. Christ's human nature, we don't say that Christ was a human being. That's actually heretical. We say he's a divine person with a human nature, fully human, fully divine. So he's not a human being in the sense of just being without a divine nature. Okay? So, what does this mean in relationship to Our Lady? She's a single player. She was the only one who was created in that state. The common opinion of the theologians is that she was actually created in a state of grace higher than all the other angels, even at that time. So when she was created, the state of grace she had was higher because of God's foreknowledge that she would become the Mother of God. From that point on, the common tradition of the church is that Our Lady was preserved from falling into even venial sin until she agreed to be the Mother of God, and then she was what's called confirmed in grace, which means from that point on, again, the common tradition of the church was she was incapable of sinning from the time when she agreed to be the Mother of our Lord. It's at that same time that she enters into a mystical marriage with the Holy Spirit, that is the love of God. She actually enters into a mystical marriage of pure love. And that mystical marriage means that he preserved her from falling into any sin whatsoever. Because she was created in the state of grace, again, is the common opinion of the theologians, that Our Lady had what we call no antecedent appetite. What does that mean? Well, most of us, this is where virtue is going to be really important. Most of us, actually all of us, after original sin, when Eve ate the fruit and Adam ate the fruit, what was passed on to us was something that disordered us. So what happened was, is when Eve saw the fruit, it says in Scripture that she saw that it was pleasing to the sight, which meant that reason knew, because she already revealed, God told us we are not to eat from the fruit of this tree. But then she sees that it's pleasing to the sight. So what happens is the lower faculties, her emotions, take pleasure in something that reason knows is wrong. The fathers of the church call that the scintillation. So she saw that, she took pleasure in it. Adam, of course, did the signing. But she saw that, took pleasure in it, and then when she ate the fruit, it confirmed that inclination, the appetite to take pleasure in things that are contrary to reason. That is a disorder that happens now in our emotions. This is why, after original sin, all of us, our emotions are all over the map, right? So, G.K. Chesterton used to say that being a human being after the state of original sins, like running and jumping out of a horse that runs in all directions, right? Because it's going every which way and it's hard to control. But so what happened was, before the fall, they had the preternatural gift of integrity, which meant that these lower faculties were perfectly subordinated to reason. They never had emotions before were contrary to reason. After the fall, because they chose a good that they knew was contrary to reason, then what happened is that now we have emotions that are either before we even have a chance to think about it, or contrary to what we want in our will. That is called antecedent appetite. Our Lady had none of it. Neither did Christ, but Our Lady had, as a pure human being, Christ preserved her from those disordered inclinations of antecedent appetite. She had a consequent appetite, that is, when reason would see in her something that was good, she would take joy in it, so that she did have emotions. In fact, her emotions, she had stronger emotions in life than we do, because of the fact that her emotions followed reason, they were perfectly subordinated to, and they were freer, they were less bound. Because in us, our emotional life, when it's contrary to reason, we fight it, and so our emotional life isn't as pure, right, as it is in the person who has just purely consequent emotion. So what does this have to do with virtue? Virtue, remember what I said, it renders the faculty good because it inclines us to do the right thing. So when I have a virtue, let's say, temperance, I have the virtue of temperance, and so when I get around food, my appetite isn't just wanting to eat greedily, like a pig, right? Instead, it's moderated to control. I'm not getting all giddy because I'm seeing chocolate or steak or something that's quite lovely. So I'm seeing these things, and it's not my appetites are getting out of control, right? So what virtue does is virtue removes antecedent appetite and perfects consequent appetite so that your emotions and your lower faculties actually follow reason more perfectly. If you have an emotion that's out of control or you don't want it, that tells you that you actually have a vice somewhere in one of your faculties. So if you're getting angry, it means you don't have the you don't have the virtue of meekness, you have the vice of anger. If you're getting, if you see the chocolate, you lose control and you're just eating without thinking about it. It's a sign you don't have temperance. Okay. So what does this have to do with Our Lady? Our Lady never had any antecedent appetite. So she was preserved from those inclinations that we get to do things that are actually sinful or contrary to what is according with the will of God, and also she didn't have the inclination to do those things with disorder. So every time we commit a sin, we disorder our faculties because we incline them towards things that are contrary to the law of God. She didn't have that. So instead, her whole life, she didn't have the gift of integrity, which was the gift that Adam and Eve had. Instead, the fathers of the church say that she was given a particular grace to keep those things perfectly, the lower faculties perfectly subordinated to reason and will. So that she did have emotions, but it was always based upon a reason to see this emotion was good to have in that particular moment. Unlike us, of course, whose emotional life is all over the map, we have to continue to work on virtue. But now, if you think about what that means as the converse, because she didn't have the inclinations to do things that were disordered. Now, once in a while, you'll hear priests even say that Our Ladies have suffered temptation like the rest of us. That's actually contrary to the tradition of the church. One of the titles of Our Lady is Mother Inviolate, which means even the demons knew there was something different about this woman because of the fact that they did not get access to her. She was preserved, and then when she became the mystical spouse of the Holy Ghost, they had no access to her interior, to affect her interior. Of course, they could affect things externally to her, but with God allowed it. But they couldn't affect her interior, so they saw that. So she didn't have these inclinations. She didn't have disordered appetite from original sin. She didn't commit any sin because the church teaches us that she remained sinless her entire life. That's why her entry into heaven is her most triumphal moment, because at that moment she triumphed. She had fought the battle and had reached heaven without ever having committed sin, having never fallen into the enemy. So she didn't have the disordered appetite. She didn't have any vices either because the church said she was sinless, so she didn't do those things that cause people to be disordered. So it meant that every single thing that she did her entire life, everything, was in accord with virtue. Everything. That meant that once she reached the age of reason, of course, when children are younger, they don't develop virtue. Instead, you have to train them, right? Aristotle says, when kids are before the age of reason, which is somewhere between 4 and 6, depending on the child, you have to use pleasure and pain, right? Because that's the only thing they understand, right? You put your hand on the top, get you slapped. Give your cheek in the cookie jar, get you slapped, right? Okay. So, what that tells you is that with the with children, of course, they have to do that. Now, one of the traditions of the churches is that Our Lady was actually an exemplary child because of the fact that she wasn't inclined to anything that was disorder. So whenever she was told something by her parents, she was perfectly obedient. So St. Joachim and St. Anna had it pretty good. This perfectly obedient child. And even they must realize there's something different here. Now, of course, they knew something was different because Anna had her in the stage. But there's obviously something very different here with this child. Once she reached the age where she came into reason, every single thing that she did was building virtue. Everything she did, everything she chose what was good, and therefore she chose virtue. Well, there's two kinds of virtue. There's infused virtue, like faith, hope, and charity. And then there's also the theological virtues. And then there's also the infused moral virtues, prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice, which we get once we're in the state of grace. And St. Thomas says that those infused virtues can't be operative unless we overcome our faculties, these disorders in our faculties, by building the natural virtues of temperance, fortitude, and justice. Okay. So we have to build those. Now with Our Lady, she didn't have anything that would block the operation of the infused virtues because she didn't have any disordered appetites, right? Did she develop natural virtue? Yes, because that's part of adorning the soul. So before she entered into mystical marriage, if she followed the same path, which it seems to be, if she followed the same path as the saints who entered into the stage of the latter stage, there's 9 levels of prayer, the latter stage of prayer, where in that stage the person is developing virtue. She would have developed some natural virtue along the way, but at a certain point, it probably would have transitioned more, especially as she started getting older, to doing everything from a supernatural motive. So, what does this mean? Remember when I said that sanctified perfection is the adornment of the soul of all the virtues. Her soul is adorned with all the virtues. Because her life was never one of sin. Everything she did built virtue, which meant that her level of virtue exceeds everyone else's. Everyone. Now, of course, the angels don't have virtue, except one, they have charity. They were created, when they were first created, they were created with faith, hope, and charity, but they didn't, and then if they accepted the task that was given to them, charity remained with the faith, then they saw God immediately, so that there was no faith or hope anymore in that sense. If they didn't, if they rejected their task, and they lost all of those. But they didn't have, because they don't have a body, they don't develop moral virtues, like temperance. They don't have to worry about how much they eat, unless you're watching the movie Ghostbusters, you see the ghosts eating hot dogs. But that's not what we're talking about, obviously, because that's not what they are. They don't have a body. But Our Lady constantly developed virtue. Her entire life was one of constant development of virtue. So this means that her virtue is extreme. Now, some people will say, well, when you don't have disordered appetite, everything, God's giving you all this grace, and you are the, you're going to do the mother of God, etc. That's a pretty good gig, is what God told me just recently. That's a pretty good gig. Life is pretty easy. Actually, it's not. The saints say that Our Lady suffered more than any other human being, other than Christ, who, of course, was a divine person of human nature. In fact, she's called the Queen of Martyrs for a reason. The reason she's called the Queen of Martyrs is because at her first sorrow, when St. Simeon said to her, your soul shall be pierced, and then the tradition of the church tells us that St. Simeon revealed to her son's life, that he was going to be rejected. He was going to be put to death by the elder Jews. And she goes down. So the saints say that as soon as she heard that, there was a joyful mystery in knowing that, St. Simeon reacted to Christ, was turned into sorrow. And she carried that with her entire life, knowing that this is what was going to happen, that he was going to be put to death. And of course, she stood at the cross. We're going to talk about what that means here in a minute. So she actually suffered, which means she encountered things that were difficult, and yet she still always performed what was virtuous. So let's just take a few virtues and walk through it a little bit with Our Lady. First is prudence. Prudence is a virtue in which you know the means to attain the end. You know what the right thing is to do at the right time. That's what prudence is, right? St. Gabriel shows up, says, you're going to conceive. He says, how's this? I don't know when. And then he reveals that the Holy Ghost will cause this. And then she says, behold the handmaid of the Lord, which means what? She chose at that moment to choose a path of life in which was prudent, right? It was the right thing to do at the right time. I mean, obviously, there's an angel showing up saying, hey, I suggest you do this. You're going to do that. But, and I'm speaking flippantly there, of course, but there is a reason why but she did that, because she was prudent. Remember, everything she did was virtuous, meant that all of her life she was always choosing the right thing at the right time. Whereas with the rest of us, we tend to do stuff that's really silly. St. Thomas says there's 8 daughters of the vice of lust. The daughters are vices, they're effects of lust. And one of them is precipitation of judgment, where we'll look at something and we don't judge the right thing to do at the right time because our appetites are disordered, right? It affects our judgment. Our Lady never had that. She also never suffered from any disordered appetites in relationship to lust, so she never would have had that precipitation of judgment, even though that St. Thomas talks about it in that context. It actually pertains to any disorder, passion, or emotions. We all know this from our own personal experience. When we have these strong emotions, we tend to think not very clearly. Like when we get angry, for example, once it all subsides, later we realize our head clears, because the anger isn't making something perceived worse than it actually is. It's not so bad if the guy catch you off in traffic. Right? After you clear it, that's okay. So the point is that with us with disordered appetites, we have that precipitation of judgment. And as we grow in virtue, then our mind begins to become clearer, right? Well, Our Lady never had that, so she had great clarity of mind. In fact, her clarity of mind was not even just because of the fact that she constantly developed virtue. The saints say that she was exceedingly intelligent. She was very bright. In fact, the tradition is that she grasped the 10 Commandments and Judaic law very thoroughly and very well at a very young age. Because why? Well, one is because she had that clarity of judgment. She was intelligent. But getting back to the prudence, she always chose the prudent path, right? Wedding at Cana, she goes to Christ. Now, according to some of the fathers of the church, the reason why she went to Christ pass from the wine is because of the fact that Christ was the one who was in charge of the particular party at the time. And so they have no wine. And then he says, what is this to you? It's me. So then she just turns, she simply turns to the steward and says, do whatever he tells you. It's pretty prudent. Do whatever Christ tells you, whatever it is, regardless of how painful, regardless of the sacrifice, regardless of that is a prudent thing to do. She says, do whatever he tells you. In fact, when you look at Scripture, every single thing she says on a practical level exemplifies prudence. Then, she stood beneath the cross, right? Now, the cross is the means of salvation for everybody, not just Catholics. Anybody who manages to be saved is saved by means of the cross. Christ is the only Savior, period. Buddha doesn't save, sorry. Muhammad doesn't save, sorry. Christ is the only one who saves, right? But she's standing beneath the cross, and Christ is the solely divine means of salvation. She's standing beneath the cross, attending to the means of everybody's salvation. She's doing the right thing at the right time. Now, you take your average human being, if it was their son sitting on there, they'd be screaming, yelling, and wailing, and carrying on, and being all angry, and chewing out the Roman guards and everybody else in the process, right? She's silent. And this silence demonstrates another virtue, modesty, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But she was silent. She stood beneath the cross, and she accepted it. That cross was her sacrifice. One of the virtues is justice. Justice is rendering to someone their due. That's what you have to give. So if I tell you, look, if you shovel my walk, especially when it snowed recently, if you shovel my walk, I'll give you $10. You shovel the walk, I owe you $10 of justice. I owe you, it's due to you. Part of the virtue of justice is the virtue of religion. The virtue of religion is that by which we render to God his due. Now, there's 4 acts under the virtue of religion. I'm not going to go into all of them, but one of them is sacrifice. Sacrifice is when there's 3 parts to sacrifice. The first is the offertory. That's where you take the thing you dedicate it to God to sacred use. The second is you slay the victim. So in the case of Christ, when was the offertory? It was at the Mount of Olives. Calvary. He's sitting in Calvary, and he says, not my will, but thine be done. So he sacrifices it. He offers to God the Father his human will to do what God the Father wants. The slaying of the victim hangs upon the cross. Third, you have to consume the victim. In the Jewish law, the reason you have to consume the animals that were slaughtered is to make sure that that which was set aside for sacred use doesn't end up in profane use. Right? You don't make hot dogs out of it and sell them on the street. Right? So the priest would consume it. You see the same thing at Mass. The priest does the offertory. He says the words of consecration, where the body of Christ is sacramentally split from the blood of Christ, which is the slaying of the victim, and then the priest consumes it. Right? Okay. So where is that? So that sacrificing, where is that? Sacrificing is when you offer and you dedicate or offer something to God from what you have as your own, and so you're separated from it in some way, right? So you take your best calf, your own calf, you give it, you offer it to God, it's slayed, and then it's consumed, and it's no longer yours, it's given to Him. This is exactly what Our Lady did. Her offertory began very early on, though. Be it done unto me according to thy word is when it began. Her sacrificing began in the beginning, when she became the Mother of God. And it persisted all the way to the end. She never retracted that. When St. Simeon said this is what's going to happen to your son, she accepted it. She embraced it and realized that this is the will of God. She stood beneath the cross of Christ and did not block what was happening there. Right? The second thing is she offered herself in sacrifice as well. How do we know this? You don't go and stand beneath somebody, people putting your son to death, if you're not sacrificing, you're not going your own interior crucifixion. So we know that there was that interior offering. She gave it to God. Second, slaying the victim. Well, in the normal, when we offer things up, see, when you, in the past, you hear people, sometimes even priests make light of saying, they just say, offered up. Then you say, oh, yeah, we usually say offered up. It was called a sacrifice. You're offering this up so that you can gain merit out of it when you're at your place of heaven, because you're performing the virtue of sacrifice, right? In the case of Our Lady, so when we do it, before we get to Our Lady, the offertory is, okay, God, I offer the Son. Second, slaying of the victim. You have to die yourself in a relationship with Him. You have to just accept it. Third, it has to be complete. It can't be half-hearted. If it's only going to be half-hearted, the consummation, if it's only going to be half-hearted, it's not true consummation. It has to be the whole thing. Right? With Our Lady, she stood beneath the cross. We know the offertory was done because she was offering herself. She was standing underneath the sun. She was suffering with her son. That was her offering. Second, the slaying of the victim. When she saw her son die, the saints tell us that Our Lady's and her son's part were so perfectly united that they were practically one. So that when his part was pierced, it was like her own interior death. Third, it was complete. She didn't keep anything from our Lord in that process. She didn't run off and hide. She didn't do that. How do we know that? because she stood, and then after Christ was put to death, she stood there while they took her son down from the cross and placed him in her arms. That was her full embracing, the completion of her sacrifice, by embracing her son being put to death. That's not just her son. Not only did she love him like a son, obviously, because he is her son, and of course he would have been constant joy as a son, right? Because he would have been perfectly obedient. And the fact that she knew more about him than other people, she knew his goodness. She knew that he never did anything evil to anybody. The second thing is, she also knew that he was God. You know, it's funny because one of the reasons Christ is so harsh on the Jews in the New Testament is because, according to the fathers of the church, the Jews actually knew that there was a Trinity, and they actually, that is, the prophets and the elders of the Jews actually knew there was a Trinity. That's the tradition from the fathers of the church. So when Christ shows up and fits the bill, and they reject him, that's why he's so harsh on them. She didn't. She saw that this he has to be God because of the things that he's doing. And also, of course, it's revealed to her at the incarnation. We would call it the Son of the Most High. Well, a son is always of the same nature as the Father. You know, human beings don't give birth to donkeys, right? The Father, if he is the Son of the Most High, then he is, in fact, of divine nature. She understood that. So when she saw that, in her perfect charity is love of God and love of neighbor for the sake of God. She loved Christ for God's sake so perfectly that when she saw that, she saw them putting to death the most perfect person there was. So that that charity, and one of the effects of charity is union, St. Thomas says. So she was in such perfect union that when he was put to death out of his love for God, it was her own interior death. What does this mean? Sacrifice. It also means she's fortitude. She's got a lot of fortitude, right? What is fortitude means is the Latin phrase, power of fortitude. She was a strong woman interiorly. And so the fact that she could go through all that all her life and not just break down like most people would in some type of mental connection is a sign that she has extreme fortitude. She's a strong woman. Her life wasn't just this hunky-dory thing that went along. Then, of course, because she had perfect charity, because she was in the state of grace. So whenever you're in the state of grace, God also infuses the virtues of faith, hope, and charity. So she was in this charity, and because it wasn't blocked, it was operative in order because she didn't have any disorder. Attachments. An attachment is when our lower faculties are not indifferent to something. So, for example, our emotions. If a person has perfect attachment, according to the line of St. John of the Cross, if you have a perfect attachment, you do not have any antecedent inclination to the particular thing that's there. You can still enjoy it, but you don't have that, oh man, I have got to have some chocolate tonight. Or I have got to get some of those Reese's peanut butter cups of beer, which by the way is a big motivation. You don't have those inclinations like as attachment. How do you know you have an attachment to something? Let somebody destroy it or take it from you. Like, for example, in your car, a lot of people attach to the car. Some guy plows into it, they get out there screaming and yelling and all tore up about it, right? Or they're sad when something happens to it. It's a sign you have an attachment to it. Sanctified perfection consists of not having any attachments to anything that's created whatsoever and it being attached solely to God. So people say, well, what does this mean about my house or my wife and all that? Well, it just means this. You have to love your wife for God's sake, eventually, if you're going to be perfect. I'm not saying that romantic love and natural love is a good thing. It is a good thing. It's just that eventually, as you grow in holiness, that begins to fade. And what happens is the love of God and the relationship to your marriage just begins to consume it. So with charity, it's the it's love of God and love of the neighbor for the sake of God. Our Lady had perfect charity because there was nothing. She had no attachment. She didn't have these disordered inclinations to these things like we did. And so she suffered, but she didn't suffer because she was attached. She suffered because she saw evil. One of the things that when you talk to experienced exorcists, they will say that in doing their line of work, it's once in a while you'll get a case where afterwards you're not the same. And it's not because you didn't commit any sin, it's just because you've dealt with in such an intimate fashion and evil in such a way that it's almost stripped you of something lifelike the Bible. You're not quite the same after that. And what that means is that when you come up against evil, reason recognizes evil, and then there is sorrow. And there can be moderated anger to where you want to stop this thing from causing harm. But it's not being moderated, it's not out of control, and it's always only when it is and to the degree that it's supposed to be. With Our Lady, her emotional life, she dealt with things that were hard and that things were sad, so she had an emotional life, but not because of an attachment. It's actually a virtuous thing to be sad at something that is truly evil. It's a virtuous thing to have moderated anger in relationship to something that is disordered and is causing harm to people, to yourself, and to others. But it has to be moderated, and it has to follow reason. This is what Our Lady had. But when she stood beneath the cross, her meekness was so perfect, she wasn't angry. Because anger is a complex passion in which there's a perception of evil, or it's an injury to yourself, or to something that you love. With the desire for vindication, St. Thomas says you want to vindicate or harm the other thing to stop it from harming you. Our Lady did not want to harm the people putting her son to death. She wanted from charity for them to be converted. When she stood beneath the cross, she saw her son, and her sorrow was perfect because of the fact for two reasons. One, she could clearly see what was going on. She didn't have his antecedent that's affecting her judgment. But the second part of it is that St. Thomas says that the body adjusts itself to the operations of the soul. What does that mean? Well, let's take exercise for an example. The guy's 350 pounds, has been laying on the couch for months on end, and he decides, I'm going to run the marathon tomorrow. He gets up, starts running, he gets a block, out comes the stretcher, and they haul him off to the hospital, right? Because his body isn't suited to that kind of operation, that kind of activity. But then, he gets out of the hospital, and he says, okay, I'm going to work up to this. So, first day he walks 2 blocks, then 10 blocks, then he starts jogging, and eventually, over the course of time, he starts thinning out, he gets in better shape, the body, we actually know this, that you can that there's actual genetic changes, DNA changes to your exercising patterns. These things happen, so the body starts adjusting itself to your activities, right? The exact same thing is true of virtue. Let's take it to 2 extremes to kind of see it. There are certain people whose lifestyles that we know, and I'm not imputing any sin necessarily to them because I don't know their interior life, but they're on an external level, their lifestyles are so sinful you can literally see their face. It's like an oil, right? There's a few politicians that have in mind. The opposite extreme of that. But you can see that though. People, the body is not designed for sin. It starts breaking down when people do it too much. The opposite is the case. You've been to a convent, you see these nuns who have led exemplary lives. They're very holy, very sanctified. They've been in the convent for 60 years. They're in their 80s. Even though, they're 80 to 90 years of age, they got this glow about them. You can see that. St. Thomas calls that the effect of the virtue of honesty. That is, the virtue in which you're always looking to do the virtuous thing. He says he calls it spiritual beauty, and it actually manifests itself physically in people because the body has been pursuing those things that are problems to us as human beings in the form of virtue. So you see that. Now, Our Lady, when she stood beneath the cross, her suffering was so tremendous because the body adjusts itself to the operations of the soul. This means it disposes itself to operations in accord with virtue. The more virtuous we are, the more our faculties will respond, and actually our emotional life, the more virtuous we become, our emotional life becomes more vivid. We suffer more. We actually see things. We take greater joy in things than we did when we were committing sins and things of that sort. Because Our Lady had that life of perfect virtue, her body was so perfectly adjusted to the operations of her soul that when she saw her son standing on the cross, intellectually she judged the evil of it. They're putting God to death. Then her will accepted this thing that was tragic and evil, so there was sorrow in the will. And then they over at St. Thomas calls it the principle of redundance. What's in our intellect and will go down to our lower faculties. So when we start thinking about things, we have certain emotions that arise as a result of it. So that her emotions, because her lower faculties were so perfectly disposed to the operations of the soul, she actually had greater emotional sorrow than anyone else. Looking at her son standing. And yet, it was rightly ordered, and she didn't get angry. She had perfect meekness. Meekness is the virtue in which you don't go to extreme in your reactions. It's the one that moderates anger, as I mentioned before. But it's the charity. And because she's so united to Christ in that charity, their hearts are practically one. One time a demon said to an exorcist that their hearts were so absolutely united and are united that if you make reparation to the one, you've already made reparation to the other. They're practically the same. Then there is another virtue which I want to talk about, Our Lady. So she has fortitude, justice, prudence, temperance. Obviously she had faith, right? When St. Gabriel says this is what's going to happen, she made the act of faith, she believed it and said, okay. She had hope, right? Because the man's salvation was going to be accomplished by her son. And she had charity, as we mentioned. Well, temperance. Well, Our Lady was obviously not a glove, right? You don't see pictures of her where she's like 300 pounds. But that's only part of temperance. She's also the most chaste. And so we know that she had chastity, which is also part of temperance. But there's a part of temperance that I think that most people don't seem to grasp. And then I want to make this link back to the word singular, which we start out with. Modesty is the virtue which regulates our externals. It's not just how we dress. Of course, today people don't dress. I mean, sometimes you wonder, what are you thinking? You let your daughter go out the door that way? I don't get that. I mean, a man should have a natural inclination to protect his daughter from that kind of mindset on the side of men in relationships where that just doesn't boggles my mind. It's not just your dress, though. It's not just how you dress. It's how you talk. It's actually how you, your compartment. How you talk, how you sit, how your gestures, your reactions, etc. Externally. That's what modesty does. It's a very, very broad virtue. One of the aspects of modesty is that St. Thomas says that part of modesty is reverence for a stable authority. What does that mean? It means if a person's modest, our externals will be such that when we're in the presence of someone who is an authority, we won't just bust all over them and dominate them, etc. Well, we saw that at the wedding of Cana, right? Do whatever he tells you, right? She respected his authority to make the determination. But there was a part of modesty that she had, though, too, is that in her externals, she never, ever did anything externally that wasn't in accord with virtue. When she stood beneath the cross, she manifested modesty so perfectly because she wasn't going to extreme in her reactions and venting like people do during road rage. She stood there silently. Part of the virtue of modesty is silence. Why the virtue is silence? Because we get a certain amount of virtue in talking. We get a certain amount of pleasure in talking. And so in that pleasure, people loquaciousness, the vice of loquaciousness is the vice contrary to the virtue of modesty, where the person has immoderate pleasure in talking. Right? They didn't have that. If you look at Scripture, she's a woman of very few words. She stood beneath the cross completely silent, as I mentioned before. This is one of the reasons why, if you look at the actual apparitions of the church that have of Our Lady in the last 2 centuries that actually do have approbation, there's a lead-up, usually an angel or something shows up, Our Lady shows up, there's a few apparitions, she's very succinct, very much to the point, it's done, it's over with, she's gone. Not this for 30 years in whack. That's not Our Lady. Okay? Because that's not how she behaves. Quite frankly, my theory is she's more intelligent than that. Why does she have to take 30 years to tell us something like that? But anyway, okay. So what does this mean, though, about the virtue of modesty? Part of the virtue of modesty, as I mentioned before, was the virtue of honesty, which is the virtue which you're always looking to do on the externals. You're always looking, says St. Thomas says, it's some virtue, the virtue of modesty. It's where you're always looking to do the right thing at the right time. So what happens when things are happening around you, your first inclination is to sit and look at your own, okay, this is my emotional reaction, I'm going to act according to this, my emotional reaction. No. You give me a focus on the externals. This is the right thing to do in this moment. It doesn't matter what's happening. This is what you got to do. That's what Our Lady showed during the whole Passion of Christ. And then there's also, I mean, if you look at, again, virtue of modesty, there's several different other virtues. Now, one of the virtues underneath modesty is humility. According to St. Thomas, humility is the virtue in which a person doesn't try to grasp for things that are beyond his state in life or his capacities, right? Usually it's accompanied by an excessive judgment of our own goodness. Today we live in a culture where everybody is special, which means in the end nobody is. If everybody is special, special means you're set apart from everybody else, then nobody is special because everybody's set apart from everybody. That means everybody is set apart from everybody, and therefore everybody is not special. Okay. But Our Lady was. She is singularly different from every human being that lived in several ways. One, she was conceived without original sin. I know some people basically act like they were too, but we're talking about she's the only one who was conceived without original sin, reserved for original sin. She's the only one. Other than Christ and his humanity, she's the only person who didn't have any antecedent appetite for her entire life. She's the only one who developed virtue all of her life. Everything she did was an act of virtue. She's the only person to ever carry God in her womb. And even then, Christ said, it's not that she bore me and nursed me that is her perfection. It's that she heard the word of God and kept it, which means what? That her interior beauty excels even her divine motherhood. She was different because she was assumed into heaven, body and soul. Now there's some discussion that maybe St. Joseph was too, but she was assumed. She's the mediatrix of all grace. Now there's different theories about what that means. Well, at the very base, all agree that as mediatrix of all grace, because she brought Christ into the world, who is the source of all grace, she is therefore the mediatrix. But some theologians hold, and I happen to agree with them, but it's not, the church isn't fine with anything like this, but some hold that actually all grace subsequent to Our Lady's being crowned as Queen of Heaven and Earth, all graces that come to people subsequently to that come through her. She is the one. She is the only creature that exists that can confer actual and sanctifying grace. She's the only one. This is why the church says we have hyperdulia to Our Lady. There's two types of honor that we give to saints. One is dulia, that's just the general honor we give to any saint. The church says that Our Lady is above that. They give her hyperdulia. Saint Louis Marie de Montfort says that Our Lady, the reason Satan fell, is because when he found out about Our Lady, one of the things he found out about her is that God would confer on her more grace than all other creatures combined. That means if you take all the martyrs, all the saints, all the people that are in heaven, all the grace that was ever conferred, she exceeds all of that in her one person. She's singular in that respect. She truly is special. She's unique. There's no one else like her. The fact that certain people want to make her, bring her down to the common level to make ourselves feel better, quite frankly, is blasphemy. She is different from everybody else. She's so different from everybody else that God loves her more than all of creation combined. Why? Because she more reflects Him in His creative participation in the divine nature of soul. She more reflects Him than all the other creatures, all the other creation combined. That's why He loves her so much. That's why she's different than the rest of us. But there's one last area that she's different. This is where we're going to end our conference. She was different in her humility. All those ways that she was different, she never, ever was proud to her entire life. Her entire life was one of constant humility. What is humility? It's a virtue in which you don't judge yourself greater than you are and you're willing to lead a life in accordance with the truth. That is exactly what she was. How was she humble? She knew, if you read the Magnificat, it says, "My soul magnifies the Lord," which means what? She knows that any good thing in her soul, anything that's good about her at all, whatsoever, as St. Louis Marie de Montfort also observes, is because of God. He's the cause. He's the one that's put in there. He's the one that conceived her immaculate. He's the one who preserved her from sin. He's the one who gave her all that grace. He's the one who made her mediatrix of all grace. He's the one who crowned her as Queen of Heaven and Earth. And that's why she knew her entire life. It was all about Him. That's why her life is so focused on God and on Christ. It's all about Him. And so, that being the case, she knew that she was nothing without Him. And whatever she is that is good, it's really Him. And that's the perfection of her humility. She's the most special, she's the singular person. There's no one else in the entire universe like her, nor will there ever be. And yet, her humility was perfect. Recognizing it's just Him. Part of her modesty, that means she had perfect modesty. Part of the, if you talk to, if you hear about the saints that actually had visions from Our Lady, or even if you talk to, certain exorcists who have experienced Our Lady showing up when people are liberated, they're always struck by how her naturalness. She's just very natural. Because part of humility is not putting on airs, not puffing yourself up. Big show. She just shows up, she's quiet, she's silent, she does what she's supposed to do, and she leaves. Right? And that also means that because of that naturalness, there's no barrier between us, because when people put on airs and are proud, it creates a psychological barrier in us because we know we can't approach the person because there's this legend in the own mind between us and Him. But not with Our Lady. She's perfectly approachable. Because again, why? She knows that anything that's good is for Him anyway, so if somebody wants to approach, if it's the will of God, then she accepts it. So what does this mean for us concretely? Well, one, she's the one to ask you. Look, if there's a particular virtue that you're having difficulty with, ask her to help you develop it. She developed all the virtues. Ask her to give you the grace to overcome it. Ask her to make you holy like she was. There is a direct proportion between your humility and your charity. The less you know it's you, and the more you know it's God, the more you're going to love Him, because the more you're going to see the good in Him and not yourself. That also means with her that she had perfect charity, of course. But it also means that with us, we can approach her because she loves us for his sake. She wants to see us made in the image of her own Son. And so she's approachable. She'll help you to obtain these things. She's a woman of consolation. She'll help people who have been wounded or suffering. She wants to console people. Otherwise, it's always for their spiritual well-being. But the point is in all this is, you can see why the church is always going to hold her in a higher esteem than the other saints. And you can also see why the Protestants don't get it, right? Whenever they say bad things about Our Lady, first of all, if I was Christ, I hate you're talking about my mother here. The second side of it is if you went and visited the Holy Father and his mother was standing there, or she's dead, of course, but if she was standing there, you wouldn't say, hey, get out of the way, woman, I want to talk to your son. You wouldn't do that at all. God, what you might just go to, if she knew you and she liked you, go to him and say, hey, just go to your son if he could do this for me. Right? It's the same thing with Our Lady. She's an intercessor. Okay. There is one last thing that makes Our Lady different. The saints say that Our Lady was given some type of grace in which she is aware. See, when a number of people come to us at the same time and asking, like, if 20 people came up and started clamoring for stuff, I'd have to stand back, I could maybe focus on one and then maybe another, and I could stand back and I could maybe take them as a general block, and I couldn't deal with them individually. Now, God, of course, is capable of doing that. Every single individual, he has an individual ability to pay attention to the individual particularities of that particular person. Human beings and angels are not that way. Our Lady was given some kind of grace, the saints say, because she's mediator to all grace, to be able to hear and respond to individual petitions and prayers of the individual. And so this is something that you can actually know, that if you go to her, that she will grant you what you ask. She's never going to do you wrong. She's not going to not give you something that's good for you because she's a woman of grace and virtue. And that also means, though, that on our part there should be a special love that we have for her. Right? Other than God, we should love her more. In heaven, everybody loves her more than except for God. Everybody loves God, totally. And then they love Our Lady for God's sake more than everybody else. Right? And then in heaven, the saints say it's all based on how much you like God, so how much people love you. Right? So there should be a special love that we have for her. And so we should pray to her and ask her to help us to make us holy the way she did. Now, back up just a bit and we'll end with this. The sanctified perfection is the adornment of the soul of all virtues by which we gain excellence and grace. You can see why, if she was created full of grace, and by the way, that full, St. Thomas and the saints say, does not mean that she couldn't take any more on. Because it's a created thing, and therefore it can always be increased. But it meant that at that point in her life, she had all the grace that was proper to someone who had always retained the grace and had always done everything meritoriously. That's what that meant. And then for the rest of her life, she continued increasing in grace and in virtue. Which means she's the most holy, the most sanctified, the most beautiful thing interiorly of all of creation. So, that being the case, we should ask her to make us in your image so that we can please your Son. If you'll kneel, I'll give you a blessing, and then we're going to go next door, I believe. Benediction Deo, amico tenentis patris et filii et spiritus sancti, super vos et manet semper. Amen. So does anyone have any questions? Sure.
Talk about humor.
What's that?
Humor. I'd really like to know about humor. Like, did our Lord have a sense of humor?
Oh, yeah.
I want to know about Our Lady's sense of humor. What is humor?
Oh, okay. So the question is, did Our Lady and our Lord have a sense of humor?
Well, I don't know about your spiritual life, but he seems to be in mine, having a sense of humor. Humor is actually, well, there's two sides of it. Laughing is the reaction. It's the reaction that we have to seeing some kind of incongruity in something, and that incongruity causes us some kind of pleasure. That's what most of the philosophers say humor actually is. So, did our Lord and Our Lady have a sense of humor? Well, the one thing is they do have a certain gravity, right? Or gravitas, as they say. There's a certain seriousness about them, but they also would have had the perfect. I mean, our Lord would have had the perfect sense of humor because he knew exactly, what to say to make people laugh. Of course, it doesn't come through in scriptures, but St. Paul says he was human in all things, and so we have to believe that there was. That he would have had a sense of humor. He would have laughed at things when they were suited, and same with Our Lady. So, what kind of sense of humor did they have? That I have no idea. So, okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't have this question. But what are the best ways to teach, not only for myself, but to teach virtue to children?
I think the first thing to do is to teach them what they actually are. Temperance is you don't eat too much. So that's why when you're young we give you the plate and you have to ask us for seconds, etc. But it also means that, as they get older, when they're younger, it's really more your obligation is to command them, okay, I want you to do these things. And then they do them, and they can grow in a certain amount of virtue in that. But as they go through puberty and they get older, from the ages of about 14 to 18, it has to shift from command to counsel. So you have to say, well, maybe you should eat less, or maybe you need to eat more of this. Or, like in the case of Prudence, telling people, slow down, think the thing through. Don't act according to your emotions. Don't follow your emotions. Don't make sure that you're following what you know is the right thing. Giving them a sense of right and wrong, just not in teaching the Ten Commandments and what the Church teaches is wrong. Because I think that one of the mistakes that has been made in the past is that sometimes when kids were taught, it was like, it was no, 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 no. Rather than, even though that's a legitimate part of teaching kids, and it's a necessary part, it's not as, yes, Johnny, you can do that. Yes, you can beat the boy up. Yes, Johnny, you can, It also has to be, so you have to tell no, but there's also that you have to show them what the virtuous thing is and teach them like moderation in those areas, or teaching them, okay, when you get angry, first thing you got to do is get your mind off of it, because the appetites are moved by what's in our imagination, or emotions are moved by what's in our imagination. Okay, if I'm angry, I got to clear my mind, get the anger to subside, and then that's how I'm going to start developing meekness. So teaching them things like custody of the mind and things like that. So it's actually teaching them what the particular virtue is, and then from there, when they when something comes up, say, well, this is a opportunity to develop this virtue. So in the concrete. And you have to be virtuous yourself, because you're not going to give them much motivation to be virtuous if you're not. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Are you sure about that last part?
Yeah. Although sometimes the kids are more virtuous than the parents, but yeah.
Just talk a bit more about the Blessed Mother being the spouse of the Holy Spirit. And is that the same as the Church being the bride of Christ? Is that the same type of parallel?
Yes. There's mystical marriage. Well, it should be. The archetype, or the main one, is Christ and the Church. That Christ is the spouse to the Church, and the Church is all of it's the Catholic Church. It's all of us in relationship to Him. So what that marriage is let's just talk about natural marriage, and we can apply it analogically. Natural marriage is a bodily contract. If you want to ask me about why I think the word covenant is not a good word, you can ask me about that later. But it's an actual contract, because it's a matter of justice in which the spouses exchange rights over each other's body. It's a giving. It's a giving rights to the person. So there's a commitment, there's a vow, and there's a kind of a permanent attachment to the person until they're dead. Right. In mystical marriage, Christ gives his life, or gives himself to the church, both in the Eucharist, but also gives his life so that we can receive grace. The church also gives itself to Christ. That's the nature of it. And so there's that giving of each other to each other. So that's part of the mystical marriage. When you apply it to Our Lady in the mystical marriage, she had the kind of mystical marriage that St. John of the Cross talks about, where I mentioned the 9 levels of prayer. There's 3 stages of the interior life as we grow in holiness, and it corresponds roughly to these 9 levels of prayer. And then the 8th level of prayer is what's called the conforming union, and that's basically where, in that stage, the person wants to die because they love Christ so much they want to be with him for all eternity. They want to be with him. They don't want to be separated from him. They're going in and out of mystical contemplation. That's the nature of their prayer, pretty much. They're going in and out of mystical contemplation. But they haven't reached perfection. Christ hasn't rooted out the last vestiges of imperfections yet in them at that stage. Once the last vestige of imperfection is rooted out, then they enter in what's called the transforming union, where they enter into a state where there's constant mystical contemplation. So, take, for example, St. Margaret Mary. She reached the transforming union at the age of 24. And she said she always had an awareness of Christ's presence. Even when she was carrying out her duties, she was constantly aware of him. Constantly. There was no separation between what she was doing and her awareness of him. God only gives somebody in mystical marriage. Eventually, all of us who get to heaven will have mystical marriage. You can either have it in this life or in the next, or you don't get it at all, obviously. But what is mystical marriage? Well, it's like any other marriage. Why do you date? You date to determine whether the person has sufficient virtue to be a good spouse. That's why you date. You don't date because it's wonderful and you get all those good feelings, although that's true too, and it's a good thing. I'm not saying if you don't have that, there's probably something wrong. But the point is that you're looking to see, will this person treat me justly? Will this person treat me with charity? Will they control themselves in relationship to me, right? And if they do, if I see that, then say, okay, I know that I can trust you with myself. In the case of mystical marriage, God doesn't trust himself to somebody entirely to make it a permanent entrustment until the last vestiges of imperfections are out and he knows they're not going to offend him again. So what happens is, in mystical marriage, once the person enters into a state where they're never going to offend God again through sin, and then so God gives himself entirely to the person, and then in that giving of that person, there's also, it's like any other marriage. I will be with you until the end. So the common opinion of the theologian, the spiritual writers, is once you enter into the transforming union mystical marriage in this life, God will never retract, you'll never lose your state of grace, and God will never retract his presence from you. So that's kind of what the mystical marriage looks like with Our Lady. But the one difference, of course, is that it's more intimate than the rest of us because he loves her more. So, does that answer the question? Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I've read that the Blessed Mother experienced and wanted to have the experience of our Lord's crucifixion, and that by the grace of the Holy Spirit she was able to experience all that pain. There is, well, because of, I mentioned that one of the effects of charity, well, the effect of love, one of the primary effects, St. Thomas says, the primary effect of love is union. And when we're unified with somebody and they're starting to go through pain and suffering, we would almost want to do it for them in their place, or we want to go through it with them because we don't want to be separated from them, and we want to be able to comfort them and console them, etc. And so, yes, that's true, that her unity with him was so perfect that everything that he suffered, she suffered in an interior way.
You mentioned like 64 different virtues and some kind of structure to it. Is there kind of like there's obviously interaction between different virtues.
Right.
Is there some sort of systematic description of that interaction, like a map or something? It's humility is connected to certain things.
It's the.
And just for full disclosure, he's an engineer.
It's. How well do you know Latin?
I'll ask my son.
Okay. The Secunda Secunda of St. Thomas is the one that has the whole thing unpacked. If you want to get a really good book, although last I heard they were really expensive, I managed to get one for free, but it's just called The Way of Christian Perfection by Rodriguez. It's a 3-volume work in English that lays out all of the virtues. So like modesty alone is 20 pages long. So it's usually the long one is justice because they got to deal with contracts and all that other stuff. But that's a work I would really recommend. It's very accessible. Average layman can read it. So, Rodriguez.
I often get the impression that people have the idea that Satan fell from grace and before that was a good angel. But in my reading of Aquinas, I get the idea that he thought that he was never a good angel and that he made an instant decision for his lifestyle. Which is the correct interpretation of that?
Well, I do subscribe to St. Thomas. I'll just give you St. Thomas's thing. He says there's 3 instances in the angels. He calls it the 2 instances. I add a third, which he talks about, but he doesn't label it. But the first instance is that angels were created in the state of grace in an act of knowing, instantaneously. Boom. And in that one act, it's not like us who has to think about things for a while. They were instantly created in an act of grasping who God is, what their task was, their assigned task, that their salvation hinged upon it. If they don't accept it, these are the ramifications. They could see all of that in this one thing. They also had, when they saw that, there was a concomitant delight in their will that they had immediately from it. Boom. Then, they made that's the first instance. The second, so it happened like boom, 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 and then it's over. Right. So the next thing is, the next act that the angel performed was a choice to accept their God-given task or not. And if they did accept it, then it meant that they would see God face to face. They were saved. If they did not accept it, it meant they were damned. So in the case of Satan, he was created in that instant state of knowing. If you talk to exorcists who actually deal with him, one of the things they can beat him up with is command him to think about the first joy of his creation, causes him pain. Okay, so they see once now that they've fallen. So there's that initial state. They made their choice. In his case, he rejected his task. And then the third instance is immediate judgment occurs. You don't have to wait around. Once in a while, you'll hear popular things being said, oh, well, there was kind of this, some angels didn't really know what they were going to do. That's just not at all how the angels function. Angels instantaneously exhaust and grasp the nature of a thing completely to the degree that they're capable of instantaneously. It's not like us who have to kind of weigh things out. That's not at all how it works with them. They instantly see the nature of the thing, all its effects, how it's going to unfold, if whatever the case is. So the other part of the popular dissemination is that they say, oh, well, some of them only gave half consent, and there was kind of this battle that ensued. Well, there was a battle, but it's not exactly the way. And so some angels kind of waited around to see who was going to win the battle. And well, first of all, we already know who's going to win the battle, and they would have known that. But that's all false. They didn't, because they instantaneously grasp. See, the reason we can give partial consent to something is because we're stupid. Right? No, really, human beings are really clueless. And this is why, this is why God had mercy on us, right? So the point is that they're not stupid. They're not clueless. And you can tell this when you're in session with them during exorcisms. They know exactly. They never have. The only time they ever ask for clarification is when you're talking like an idiot. Not when there's something questionable about the material.
So the point being is that, so they had this, they immediately grasped it, they made their full choice, then boom, they were punished for it immediately. They had the pain of loss, they were cut off from God, they were still in the presence of the good angels, they still had that intercommunication, the abyss had not been established yet. At a certain point, then God gave, so there was this kind of this battle ensued, because God likes a good fight. And of course, the bad angels got beat up pretty badly. And then at a certain point, God gave St. Michael the ability to cast Satan and his followers into the abyss. And then that's what happened. So
your answer is that he was never a good angel.
He was good in his initial creation, but he...
Potential.
No, not in potential. He was good, but he never made a good choice. The one choice that determines their eternal destiny was bad.
So I've heard that, or read that Lucifer was the highest of all the angels.
Right.
So how do you square the dichotomy? If he's the highest of all the angels, the most intelligent of all God's creatures, outside of Mary, and he knows a priori if he chooses not to fulfill his task because of his damnation, he does it anyway.
It's the same reason why we commit mortal sin. There was something about his choice that he... Well, let me back up. One of the things I didn't mention in the conference was this. St. Thomas says that, in the virtue of religion, the primary act that falls under the virtue of religion is the virtue, or the act of sacrifice. And St. Thomas says, and just in this handed part in one of the responses to an objection, really sure, says, well, ultimately the sacrifice that God really wants from every rational creature is a sacrifice of his will. What he really wants is for you to do his and not your will, which is ironic because our entire culture, our entire modernity, everything about everything is all based upon ourselves and upon our free choice and upon our own, what we want to do, right? It's the antithesis to what God actually wanted, right? So what happens is, and so that sacrifice of the self-will is ultimately what he wants from every rational creature, even the angels. There was something that they had to die to interiorly for that. So, when you talk to them, they'll say things like, I saw this, but I couldn't accept it, or I saw this, and I didn't want to have to give this up. And that because... Not that they would suffer pain in it, but there was that death to self that they had to undergo too, and they didn't do it in their choice. So in the case of Satan, there was something in it that he could not bring himself to accept as part of his task. One of the things too is you'll be beat him up and you'll say, so your choice was foolish, yeah, and you knew it, yeah. And you knew it was going to cause you damnation. Yeah. You knew the suffering you're going to suffer. Yeah. You knew it again. Yeah. Literally, I've done that with them. And basically what it boils down to is that once they make their choice, their will is fixed in the evil. This business, there's a lot of stuff going around. Well, maybe in the end time, God will give them another chance. No. The angels know it's permanent. They know that will never change. Their will is incapable at this point of turning because it's now fixed in evil or fixed in good. When we die, our will be fixed either in the good or evil. So it's not something where there's going to be some change later. But anyway, to get back to, there was something in it that required them to sacrifice themselves to, and that's what it all... And really, what it boils down to, are you going to choose God or yourself? It's the real choice. Yeah.
Questions about guardian angels. Were they created before we were created? Or?
All the angels were, the entire hierarchy of angels, the billions and billions and billions of them were created all at once in an instance. Boom. So your guy was created, yeah. And his task, I think I might have mentioned this at maybe it was in a different location. When your guardian angel was created, what he saw he saw you. God revealed to him, this is the person that you're going to guard, and this is what they're going to be like. This is the general course of their life. They don't know everything about your life, but they know some of the things that's going to happen in your life. And then they have to choose. Now, the definition of love is willing the good of another. The first choice that your guardian angel made in being willing to accept to guard you, which is your good, is an act of love. The first choice of his was to love you. So yes, they were created, and then they just kind of hang around until you finally show up on the scene, and then they go to work.
Is it just like my guardian angel's just with me, and then when I die, do they get a different person?
No, that's part of the thing too. Is that they're created? They're actually created for you, by the way. Yeah.
So what if my guardian angel chose to go with the bad guys? Do I get another one?
Yeah. You do. Yes.
No, because if they were given that, then they had that choice.
That's right. Well, maybe not yours, but no. Yeah, right. No, yes, you're given another one. Yeah. So, which ironically, that's also presented to the angel that was created. He might not have been initially created for you, but then it might be, say, okay, your task is this, but I'm going to also assign you to do that or something. So, he would have known. He had to accept it. So, yeah.
I have a question along the lines of the Blessed Mother. Obviously, there are some devotions in the church, like the Rosary. I know you promote Our Lady of Sorrows. Are there other means that you think are most effective?
Use of the sacramentals, I think, are really good, like scapulars and the Miraculous medal. I also think one of the devotions I've had phenomenal success with, which I started just before Pope Francis was elected, was the Our Lady Undoer of Knots. Undoer of Knots. Extremely effective. Well, basically what it is that Our Lady has the capacity to take things that are complicated and untie them. It basically, she can take stuff like if they say something get really complicated in your life or something, you can say the devotion to her, and it'll literally unravel very quickly. So, yes.
I have heard people say, like, to refer to the spirit of anger. I am angry a lot, and it seeps out into my whole household and into my kids. And I don't even know my question. Just give me a word on dealing with anger.
You need to heal. Anger is a perception of injury with a desire for vindication. When we've been hurt or injured, there is a sensitivity that results from the prior injuries. And when somebody hurts us, it's like sticking a knife in us, right? So you have one of two choices. You can either grab the knife, which St. Thomas calls contraction. So you grab the knife because you don't want it to go any deeper and you don't want it to cut any worse than it already has. Now the problem is that you're not pulling it out, and so you're not going to heal. So attachment to any prior injuries, lack of forgiveness, but any attachment to prior injuries, wanting resolution of those injuries, not being willing to suffer whatever happened, just being detached from them, is the first step. This next one is you got to pull the knife out. That's the next one. The problem is pull the knife out is it's brutal as it's coming out, right? It's really, really painful. But once it comes out, then what does that analogically? What does that mean? It means that we have to let loose of the injury. We just have to be willing to suffer and not, make ourselves the standard of what's happening. But we have to just be willing to suffer and let loose of prior injuries. When you do that, then you can, once you pull the knife out, then you can start to heal. But the second thing is that, Christ said, or St. Paul said that through his wounds we are healed. Christ allowed himself to be physically wounded to merit the grace for our interior healing. The second thing is that sometimes the wounds that we have, we don't know. And so we have to ask Our Lady, reveal to me where's the woundedness? If I'm angry all the time, or if I'm angry, just angry, where's the woundedness, or where's that unwillingness to say, what's there, what am I attached to that's causing this? The second thing is that Our Lady suffered. The Church refers to her 7 sorrows, not her 7 wounds. What is a wound? It's damage. It's something that something has penetrated us, it's caused damage, or it's hurt us, it's got into us, and it's hurt us, and it causes damage, and therefore there's a healing process that has to occur. In relationship to Our Lady, she didn't have to heal because she was detached, and so she was willing to suffer. So when the suffering came, she simply accepted it as the will of God, and so she wasn't angry and didn't get hurt by it. She suffered, but she didn't get damaged from it. So if we're angry, if we're in the habit of anger, it means there's something that has been injured in the past, or which we're in fear of being injured, and we have to find out what that is and let loose of it. The flip side to that is develop a strong devotion to the Sacred Heart, because Christ said, "Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart." Meekness is the virtue opposite of anger. And what will happen is if you develop a strong devotion to the Sacred Heart, you'll notice you'll be tempered. Things will just kind of smooth out a little bit. So, yeah.
Question. Any insight?
Oh, but I should stop. There is a spirit of anger, but he always picks on something. So you got to find out what is that thing he's picking at. I'm sorry. Yeah. Demon. Yeah. One last question, and then we should probably wrap it up. Actually, unless nobody has a question. Yes.
One of my favorite saints is Josepha, and that she was troubled by demons or marred by demons. Are you aware of that? And do you have any comments on?
Yeah, I mean, God allows the saints to be afflicted by demons in various ways. There's even been saints who have been possessed for a while. There's Saint Teresa of Avila was afflicted by a demon of obsession to scrupulosity. And there's, Padre Pio and these guys get beat up by them and stuff. So that's, why does God allow it? For their further sanctification. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've done anything wrong. It just means that God uses the demons to sanctify them. One of the things that God likes to, that's part of his sense of humor, I suppose. One of the things that God likes to do is he likes to use demons as the instruments of other people's sanctification. So the demon, he's beating you up, but he's sitting there watching you go holy, so it's kind of cutting off his nose just by his face. So he hates doing it, but he can't help it. So, okay. Oh, wait a minute, I thought that was the last question.
Well, yeah, but you said something, okay? All right, who killed Onan?
Our Lord did, right?
Yeah, but was it our Lord or was it the demon?
Demons are allowed to affect your health, even to the point where you end up dying from it long term. But one of the things we know from the book of Job is that demons are not allowed to, quote, touch his substance, unquote, which means they're not allowed to kill you directly. So, God. Okay, I'll just give everybody a blessing. You can remain seated if you want. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti super vos et manet semper. Amen.